The morning I heard metal teeth chewing my pasture, I thought a tornado had learned to gnaw. I set my coffee down, stepped onto the porch, and watched an excavator bite a clean, ugly line through the rye. Orange flags marched over the hill like someone had staked a claim on my life. Diesel hung in the air over crushed grass. The crew wore bright vests, hard hats, and that look city men get when they think country land is just paper. I walked out slow, calm matters. My father taught me that on mornings just like this, under his flag breathing in the breeze above the porch. The excavator paused. A man with a clipboard waved without looking. HOA was stitched across his chest like a badge. "Morning," I said. "You're on my ranch." "Common utility project," he answered, tapping his clipboard, proved and recorded. "We're laying a pipeline to serve the development east of you. We're inside the easement." "This pasture belonged to my grandfather," I said. "I learned to walk between that windmill and the spring house up the ridge. If there's an easement, it'll be in the deed, and it won't cross here." He tried a smile that wasn't friendly. "No need to argue. We're keeping your neighbor's taps from running dry." Another excavator fired up. The sound rattled my ribs. I breathed through it and stepped to the marker. The orange flag fluttered at the edge of the cattle trail that ends at the trough my father built with his own hands. Time is measured there by how cattle lowered their heads to drink. That matters more than a pipe-feeding houses built last year by men who never stayed to see a sunrise. "Stop," I said, simple, direct. "Until I see the paperwork." He radioed someone. The crew shut down. I called the county clerk. Kept her number since the last time a surveyor tried to redraw my fence line by leaning on a compass like it was a wishbone. I gave her the parcel number and asked for recorded easements. She said she'd check. I asked the clipboard man to walk with me to the corner pin, sitting under a little rust and a lot of pride. He wouldn't. Said he had everything he needed. Anger rose quick and black. The boy in me who watched his dad set that flag wanted to shout. But my father's advice held. If you raise your voice, you lower your leverage. So I kept it low and called the sheriff when the deputy rolled up. I saw him weighing things. HOA patches, heavy machines, my boots muddy from my own pasture. He asked for documents. Clipboard produced a folder thick with plans and confident lines. I handed the deputy my dog-eared deed. The crew shifted, restless, like time itself would pay over time. While we waited on the clerk, the HOA rep started selling. Regional benefit, flow assurance, future proofing. He promised to restore to original condition, to recede, to be a good neighbor. He never once said my name. It told me everything. The deputy's phone rang. He put it on speaker. The clerk said, "We have an old 1984 utility easement for overhead electrical along the north fence line only. No record of a water pipeline easement across the southern pasture. Nothing recorded to the HOA or that developer. Silence. You could hear a blue jay argue with the wind." Clipboard cleared his throat. "We have a letter of intent from the developers' council and approval from our board." "Letters aren't easements," the deputy said. "Turn those machines off." They did. Not because they respected me, because the law had started to wake up. I photographed everything. The cut, the flags, the machines. Evidence is boring until it saves you. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my father's chipped mug. I spread the papers. Deed, survey, tax bill, an old photo of Grandpa by the windmill in a hat that belonged to this land. Anger cooled into disbelief. Disbelief hardened into a plan. If they wanted water, they wanted it from my spring. I knew. That hillside, the moss on the rocks, the spring house breathing cold in August. But the spring's boil sat just across the fence on a wooded parcel tangled in lines where 3 properties meet. That parcel had changed hands twice since the recession. I slept with the window open. The pasture smelled like rain and diesel and something else. A fight. Not a brawl. Standby morning, I'd called an attorney friend about water rights, a surveyor who still trusts a transit more than batteries, and the county clerk again. Wooded plot with the boil was in arrears. A bank held a note. A trustee sale was coming if taxes didn't get paid. I looked at my father's flag lifting into a pale sky. The pipeline wasn't the real fight. It never is. The fight was whether men who don't know your ground can write on it with machines and call it progress. Poured another cup of coffee and made a new plan, by the water at its birth. Asterisk banks don't love ranchers until ranchers bring facts. I brought stacks, maps, a hydrology note from an engineer who owed me a favor, photos of the spring house in all 4 seasons. I described winter flow and late summer trickle, showed the cattle trail to the trough. I laid out how the Haas regional benefit ran straight through my pasture and past their brand new gazebo that still smelled like stain. The loan officer leaned back. Curious? You want to buy a patch of woods because it leaks water? Want to buy the source so men with clipboards have to ask permission? I said. And so my cattle can drink from my land without me fighting a neighbor's valve. He chuckled. Headwaters, where a thing begins, I said. You handle it different. I didn't need much debt. It saved for fencing. Fences can wait when water's at stake. The bank liked the collateral and the down payment. While they ran numbers, I took a cashier's check to the trustee's attorney to stop the clock on taxes. I filed a notice of interest. I asked my attorney friend to draft a warning letter. Trespass at the source would be treated as theft. That evening, I carried a thermos to the spring house. Stones are old, stacked with farmer logic. Spring air is cooler, scented penny iron and green. I touched the water. Colder than you expect the way truth feels the first time you pick it up. By morning, the HOA board called for a conversation. The president sat straight-backed and spoke in a voice made for church basements and budget votes. Said we a lot, as if a crowd could be conjured by grammar. Claimed their contractor misread an email. Their surveyor pulled the wrong GIS layer. Their letters created standing. He called the sheriff's caution overreach. He tried to make my pasture a speed bump on the road to a water-secure community. I kept my voice quiet. You don't have a recorded easement. You don't have a right-of-way. If your pipe crosses my pasture without both, I'll sue for trespass. He offered to pay for an easement. You can't afford what it costs, I said. It costs the feeling you get watching an excavator bite the line your father walked every morning. They didn't like poetry. They wanted numbers. They wanted me tired. I gave them neither. A week later, the wooded parcel closed. The deed recorded at 10:13 a.m. I took the clerk a box of donuts because gratitude keeps the gears from grinding. Then I drove to the spring house with my surveyor, my attorney friend, and a welder who's fixed our gate since the bull learned to test hinges. We didn't cut their lines or block a thing. We installed a lockable valve 1 step above the boil, shiny as a promise. We posted a laminated notice on a cedar stake. Private source. Owner. Name. All diversions require written authorization. We logged flow. We took photos. We did it right, the kind of right that holds in daylight. The HOA's contractor rolled up while we were packing. Same vest, same clipboard energy. He looked from the valve to me like he'd found a rattlesnake on a playground. You can't do this, he said. I own it, I answered. If you think otherwise, bring a court order. He left fast enough to turn his taillights into red commas. The next letter smelled like conference room, Sisandazist public. Necessity and big nails like appropriation tossed in front of my truck. We filed our own paper, the same day-verified trespass complaint, and a request for a temporary restraining order stopping all work until rights could be sorted out. The judge signed the TRA after lunch. When the deputy served it, the HOA president called me obstructionist, selfish, and under his breath a word my father wouldn't have used even in a barn full of bulls. I let it pass. I had leverage. I wasn't lowering it. Anger popped and cooled. Disbelief flickered and went out. Action held steady. We documented. We fenced the spring parcel with smooth wire, kinder to deer. We flagged corner pins with blue tape that looked hopeful against the trees. When the welder finished the cage around the valve, he wiped his hands. Pretty, he said, and it was not because it shined, but because it meant I could sleep without listening for engines. The HOA tried a new angle. A town hall with cookies. They said my name like I was weather. I went because you show up when folks say your name in a room you can reach. I listened to fears dressed as questions. Baths for grandchildren, property values like newborns. Then a quiet neighbor spoke. She remembered the spring house from childhood. Remembered my grandfather letting kids cool their necks there after July bike rides. The room softened. The president puckered like he'd bitten a lemon. He pivoted to mutual benefit. I spoke last. No heat, just truth. The board had sent machines onto my pasture without a recorded right, called it oversight, and asked me to trust them. They used "we like it" could include me while acting like I wasn't there. The price of an easement here wasn't dollars. It was the quiet that lives on land when the people who love it are the only ones allowed to change it. I wasn't selling that. Not for cookies. Not for applause. I walked out into a clean sunset. Fence wire hummed in the last light. I ran a hand along a cedar post my father set. The fight wasn't finished. The ground under my boots felt steady. Court feels like a barn you're not allowed to touch. Everything echoes. You sit still. Our judge listened more than she spoke. The HOA's attorney wore a suit worth more than my truck's tires and stacked words: public utility, reasonable necessity, implied easement. My attorney answered with maps, dates, the clerk's recordings, photos of orange flags where no right existed, and affidavits from the deputy and my surveyor. Smaller words. More truth. The hinge was simple. You can't build a right out of convenience. The HOA had approvals inside its own borders, none on mine, and none at the source I now owned. The judge kept the trowel, set a hearing for a permanent injunction, and told both sides, cold as January 2, negotiate like neighbors before she decided like a stranger. They came back different. Less swagger. More paper. They wanted a license to cross, to tap, to meter. They offered a number big enough to soften fences. I said no. I didn't want their money. I wanted respect and their line off my ground. We countered with a settlement that read like a lesson: reroute along the existing county right-of-way. Abandon any claim across my pasture. Pay restoration. Fund a windbreak and a riparian buffer. Downstream of my trough, because that creek has carried our cattle's reflection for 80 years and should carry trees too. They balked. Their engineer ran numbers. County right-of-way costs more time, fewer lawsuits. Their insurer didn't like the word trespass. Their attorney picked up a pen. We signed, the judge approved. The deputy shook my hand at the courthouse door because sometimes the world remembers to be human. A week later, a different contractor comes low, careful lifting the small scar of trench and laying the sod back like a bandage. I watched from the porch with my father's mug in my hand, its flag ticking softly in a clover-sweet breeze while we set posts for the new windbreak. Then came the moment I'd been living toward since the first bite of that excavator. I drove to the spring house at first light when spider webs turned to silver rope. I unlocked the cage, turned the valve. The water sang its quiet note, the one it sings when it's allowed to go home the way it came up. My trough filled. The cattle wandered over and drank like the world had never tried to change on them. That afternoon I walked the fence line in a clean shirt. Where flags had been, new grass had taken hold. Where the trench had dreamed, only a thin seam remained, softening by the day. I hung a birdhouse on the windbreak. A wren argued with the sky. For the first time in months, my heartbeat didn't need to make room for anger. Justice isn't fireworks. It's a gate that swings true and doesn't sag. It's a trough that fills because a spring is allowed to be a spring. It's a letter from a judge that says what you always knew. Rights matter more than rush. That night, I watched my father's flag lean and lift like it was nodding. The HOA sent a final notice thanking all parties for their collaborative spirit. I laughed, low. Collaboration can look a lot like a stop sign when you finally notice it before you bend your bumper. Neighbors stopped by. One brought pie. Another told about a developer who once tried to move a cemetery fence by calling bones historic landscaping. We talked under a sky packed with normal stars. They said they were proud. I said I was grateful. Both were true. Before bed, I parked where the pasture opens to the ridge. The moon made the windbreak posts look like a row of soldiers. I walked to the spring house and listened. Water has a voice like a secret you're allowed to keep. I thought of my grandfather washing his hands there, my father teaching me to listen for frogs and owls, and how every fight about land becomes a fight about respect. The HOA didn't understand that until the judge translated it. In the morning, I screwed a small plaque to the spring house door. Nothing fancy. Just something my father said when I asked why he polished his boots before a rain. Care doesn't check the weather. You do the right thing even when the sky says no one will notice. When people who speak louder than they listen threaten what you love by the part they don't understand. Own the source not to hoard it, but to keep it honest. Then stand steady so the world relearns the shape of your boundary. The lake below was calm that evening. So was I. The cattle were fed. The fence was true. My father's flag made that soft cloth sound you only hear when your head is quiet. The HOA rerouted. Their taps ran. No one had to lose for respect to win. That's justice here, where water begins underground and truth starts on the porch. Have you ever had to hold your ground against a board, a neighbor, or a well-meaning committee that forgot your name? Tell me below. I read every one. If you believe some fights are worth having, hit subscribe and let's stand up together.